We have a look at the room in the back. Feel free to take some. You're ready. Thank you for joining us here today at the Harry Rose Samson Family Jewish Community Center. The Jewish Community Relations Council, or JCRC, of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation is pleased to present this educational program. My name is Michael Pollack. I'm co-chair of the Canada Forum Planning Committee, which consists of Ellis Brocker, Martha Pincus, Peter Gilbert, Gerald Glazer, Lori Amir, and Joseph. The JCRC serves as the representative voice of the Jewish community with regard to public affairs and community relations issues. 29 Jewish organizations, synagogues, agencies are represented on our board of directors. Our goal this morning is to ask the candidate about her positions on issues which are concerned to our members and to provide an opportunity for you, the community, to hear from her. This is a nonpartisan forum for educational purposes only. The JCRC does not support or oppose any candidate. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce to you our moderator of this morning's program. Ben Merens is the host of At Issue, a daily current events call-in program which airs statewide on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. He's also a public speaker. His expertise is in the art of listening. Ben has worked in print and broadcast journalism for 30 years in New York, Chicago, and Milwaukee. He holds a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, and also an undergraduate degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm glad we have something in common. Ben and his family are residents of Milwaukee's North Shore community. Thank you, Ben, for moderating this program both last week with Governor Thompson and this week with Congresswoman Baldwin. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Merens.
Thank you. Thank you very much and good morning. Welcome. Appreciate you making the time to come out here. It's easy enough to complain about what's going on in society, our politics, and our leaders, but to come out and actually be part of the political process is something you should be proud of yourselves for doing. A couple of quick things. If you didn't get here last week, the interview is online. You can see what Tammy Thompson had to say. Everything will be the same, about the same, except for two things today. The rule and the candidate. The rules don't change. If you have a question, we're asking that you fill out a card and hand them in. And we will try to get to them. We've got set questions that were asked last week that will also be asked this week. The other thing I'll tell you is the audience was very well behaved last week. So, good fourth graders. So if you want to earn your cookie, I'm going to ask you the same thing. And that is, you're here to hear from the candidate. I'm sure you'll react to certain things that are said. That reaction should be internal. Because if you take away from the time, then you take away from your own reason for being here, which is to hear what Congresswoman Baldwin has to say. If anybody does it, I'll ask you not to. If I have to ask you a second time, it'll be as I invite you to leave, and you will be escorted out. The same rules applied last week. So with all that being said, be proud of the fact you're here. Listen carefully, and the same thing I said last week, I'll say this week. Whether you agree or disagree with what is said, what you should do with the information you hear is go back to your computers and your libraries and your newspapers and research what you hear and decide what you believe was said, how truthful you think it was, the spin was on it, any reaction you had. It's not to be yelled out here, it's for you to take what you need today, do the homework you need to do so when you go vote, you're voting with your full knowledge in hand. You have a job to do too, we all do. And with all of that, thank you for coming. Congressman Baldwin, I'll start with you the same way I did with Governor Thompson, that is, why are you running for U.S. Senate?
Well, thank you for that question. I want to start by also thanking all of you for being here and for the JCC Issues Committee to have brought this together. It means a lot to have this opportunity. Senator Cole announced his retirement in, not that I remember this specific day, but May 13th, 2011. I remember getting a telephone call saying the senator needs to urgently speak with you, and speaking with him as he revealed that he was going to announce his retirement later that day. And I think about his legacy of service for this state. It started as a slogan, nobody's senator but yours, but he has lived that every day he has served the state. I'm honored to have his full support as I undertake this campaign. And I think about the slogan, nobody's senator but yours, and think that it really does bring us to where we are at this point. Are we going to have a U.S. Senator who is a voice for the hardworking families of this state? Or are we going to have a U.S. Senator who is a voice for the very powerful, the well-connected, those, frankly, who already have a pretty powerful voice in Washington? I've traveled the state for nearly a year and a half now on the campaign trail and done a lot of listening. And there's two themes that I hear repeated over and over again. One is that people are really struggling. The statistics to back it up, the Census Bureau says that the average income in Wisconsin, family income, has gone down 14.5% over the last decade. It's a lot to grapple with. But you hear the individual stories of people who are working hard, playing by the rules, and trying to get ahead, and too many of them are just getting by, unable to put a little money away for the kids' college fund or their own retirement. And at the same time, I've heard these stories around the state of Wisconsin. I've heard a second theme, one that I share at a guttural level, and that is the disconnect between the debates that are happening in Washington, D.C. right now and their lives. Too much partisan gamesmanship, like what happened last summer when we almost defaulted on our debt obligations and our nation's credit rating was downgraded. That did not have to happen. That was partisan gamesmanship. When we almost shut the federal government, they almost let the federal government shut down on 2 occasions. Again, not real crises, created crises. And people in this state want somebody who is going to go and fight for them. Not for Wall Street, not for the big pharmaceutical companies, not for the big insurance companies, not for the Tea Party, but for them. And that's what I've always done, standing up to powerful interests, sometimes against, sometimes as a small minority. But when it's the right thing to do for the hardworking people of this state. I'd say one last thing about that. You know, there's this expression we hear over and over again, work hard, play by the rules, you should be able to get ahead. That's the American dream. It's not our work ethic in Wisconsin that's changed. I submit it's the rules. Who writes them and for whose benefit? And we need a champion in the U.S. Senate like we have in Herb Cole. That's why I'm ready.
Thank you very much. First question, so I guess I caught the elephant in the room for a lot of people here on the subject of Israel. The question I'll start with today is, how would you define what it means for the U.S. to be a good friend to Israel?
Well, we must all recognize, as I do, that Israel is our most important friend and ally in the world, but certainly in the Middle East. And we share this incredible history and commitment since 1948, with the founding of the Jewish state, of commitment to democracy, a commitment to the rule of law, a commitment to social justice, civil rights, and peace. And we have no greater friend in the Middle East, frankly, in the world. I have learned that not only as a member of Congress, but you might be surprised to know my first trip to Israel was as a child in 1968, a year after the war of '67. probably some of you know I was raised by my grandparents. And my grandfather was a scientist, a biochemist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He brought me there because he was working at on a scientific collaboration with scientists at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, Israel. And we stayed there. And so my first perspective was the working relationship between two scientists, but also, I was 6 years old at the time, so I wasn't learning major foreign policy lessons, but there were things that I did learn there. How small, geographically, the country was. Half the size of Wisconsin, about the size of New Jersey. We were there at a time when for those of you who've traveled and seen the archaeological wonders and the major work, it wasn't even cordoned off yet. And my grandmother and I went to the beach and dug through the sand and found pottery shards that were 3,000 years old, and glass and pieces of buttons, and it gave me this sense of this history, but also, to the degree that a young person could, the sense of the security challenges in such a small country with hostile neighbors. Since then, I've traveled, of course, on official travel, and deepened my knowledge of the threats that Israel faces every day, and it's why I have supported foreign aid, both economic and military, $35 billion during the time that I've served in the Congress, helped support the construction of Iron Dome for missile defense, and I'm very proud of the moment we're at right now, where there has been more upper-level strategic cooperation between U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, U.S. military senior officials and Israeli military officials, as we've ever seen. I think Ehud Barak was quoted as saying, I've never seen it stronger. And that's part of what that friendship means to me.
And just to elaborate in terms of being a good friend going forward, what's the next administration, whether it's Obama administration or Obama administration, need to do? And if you're in the Senate, what would you push for when it comes to any other legislation that addresses Israel and the Middle East?
That's a huge question, and I don't want to give it short shrift, because there's obviously the relationship in terms of pushing forward for a two-state solution whereby Israel can live in long-term peace and security side by side and non-militarized Palestinian state. And I think there needs to be strong U.S. leadership in getting to that point. We've seen bits and starts in the past, and I think we need to never give up. There are too many, I think, in the U.S. and Israel who think that this is not going to happen in their lifetime, and we have to keep pressure. There's regional threats, myriad regional threats, and I would take the rest of the hour if I took each of them one by one, but let me name the largest. The threat, very serious threat, posed by Iran's nuclear program and nuclear ambitions. That is a threat to world security, U.S. security, regional security, and certainly to Israel's security. And it is a threat that I take very seriously and believe that the President of the United States is correct when he says all options need to be on the table. I don't know how many saw today's New York Times op-ed talking about the high level of cooperation between senior Israeli and U.S. military planners and officials. But I think it is right on target in terms of how closely we need to collaborate and make sure that we have the same understandings about timing of where things are. As I look back, my earliest votes on Iran were certainly in my first term. And I feel very strongly that we need to use all the tools available, and that as we learn certain things, we have had to ratchet it up. I do want to just address this because there was an article in today's Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel about my voting record on Iran. And there was a time in recent years when I thought, from looking at what was happening on the ground in Iran, there was a chance for an overthrow from within. It was referred to as the Green Revolution. And I thought that we should do everything we could to support the pro-democracy, moderate people of Iran who were speaking out when they believe an election was stolen, and speaking out against their government. Unfortunately, they were brutally attacked by their own government, and that time has passed. And after that time passed, I have returned to strong sanctions, recognizing that they hurt everyone in the country. I feel like that was a missed opportunity. We could talk as long as you have follow-up questions about Arab Spring and what that has produced, because obviously that's also a very complicated subject where it has produced different results in different parts of the Middle East. But boy, had we at that moment of time been successful in helping the Iranian people overturn their government, we would have a very different situation today.
The follow-up question I have on a list of questions is the one about Iran. That if Israel attacked Iran to thwart their nuclear weapon development, do you think the United States has a role to play in an attack?
Yes. Israel has every right to defend itself, and I believe unequivocally in that. And we are, as I was mentioning earlier, allies, not just in name only, but the level of cooperation has brought us to very common understandings about what's happening. It's timely because if you haven't had a chance to read the piece in today's New York Times by Shai Feldman, it's worth your reading because it really does indicate that we are, in my opinion after reading it, of a like mind about what our military strategic options are, what's likely to be successful, what's not, how far along Iran is. But let me say that I not only have voted this way, but feel gutturally that we cannot allow Iran to progress to the point where they are internally capable of producing a nuclear weapon.
Your opening remarks also talked about the domestic fiscal issues, and I'd like to turn to that for a minute. Given that the fiscal cliff that we reached in January with the elimination of Bush tax cuts and legally prescribed spending cuts, what are your thoughts about how the government should proceed financially in both the short and the long term?
Let me say that I believe that we have two dual challenges facing our country. Getting our economy back to full throttle, job creation, particularly private sector job creation, so that the folks I was talking about when I got my opening question can get a fair shot at getting ahead again, and dealing with our deficit and our debt. They are dual challenges. And what I object to is those who have a set of prescriptions and solutions to one of those issues and challenges that completely frustrate our ability to achieve the other. And therefore, I think given these two, the sequestration, the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, I feel like we must take a balanced approach in addressing those. I do want to just say, how did we get into this fiscal cliff crisis to begin with? And it harkens back to what I said in my opening, this frustration with the disconnect between the debates in Washington and people's real lives. We didn't have to be facing this situation. It was a manufactured crisis around the time of last summer's, 2011's debate on the debt ceiling. The folks who are screaming right now about the Defense Department sequestrations are the very folks who voted for this. And the folks who have obstructed our getting to the point where we let the Bush tax cuts expire for just the top 2%, but maintain absolutely needed small business and middle class tax cuts, because now is not the time to raise taxes on middle class Wisconsinites, hardworking small businesses. The reason why we couldn't get to that vote was that too many, like my opponent, had signed this pledge to a Washington, D.C. lobbyist named Grover Norquist that precluded them from being able to take a vote on which I would hazard a guess that 99% of Congress agrees with, that we want to keep middle class taxes low. We don't want to see those taxes raised. And so this has been a manufactured crisis. We didn't have to be here. But moving forward, as I said, the investments that I believe in to help our economy grow, and I'm not talking about spending more, I'm talking about having the right priorities, are investments in education. It has short-term and long-term benefits for our economy, as we know. Investments in research and innovation, and investments in our infrastructure. Those we must safeguard. And unfortunately, the approach embraced by my opponent, the Ryan budget, would slash those very investments. And at the same time, we absolutely need to make cuts. And I'd start with, certainly, I believe it's time to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. $2 billion a week. The mission we authorized, and I did vote to authorize use of force in Afghanistan in the weeks after 9/11. But that mission has been completed, and they are now nation building, and they need to come home. I would press for actually getting rid of the sweetheart deal that Thompson negotiated when he was overseeing Medicare, that makes it illegal for the federal government, for Medicare, to bargain with drug companies to get better prices for seniors. That has about a $20 billion per year impact. You know, the VA, appropriately on behalf of our veterans, bargains for discounts and gets prices 40 to 58% below what seniors can get. This is something we should get rid of to save money, and get rid of some of the subsidies to big oil, some of the subsidies to major corporate farms that have no bearing on, in fact, they're usually, the checks are sent to cities and not even, these aren't even folks who are involved in the day-to-day operations. These are things from the past that need to be gotten rid of. I think we can do those as well as let the Bush tax cuts on the top 2% expire and be well on our way.
When we talk about the long-term state of affairs with a $16 trillion debt, at this point, a lot of people assume what will happen is that Congress will vote to lift the ceiling because we don't seem to have an answer to tax increases and spending cuts. In the long term, what do we do about the debt? Are you concerned if it goes to 20 trillion? Do you think is there a ceiling for you that it couldn't possibly go any higher? And if we're not going to allow it to grow, over the long run, how do we decrease a debt that's going over $1 trillion a year now?
Well, first of all, I talked about the balanced approach. That we have two epic challenges facing our country. The need to get our economy back on track. We certainly should, we've certainly been adding jobs in the economy since President Obama, shortly after he was elected to office. We're going in the right direction. We also know that many of those jobs are paying less than ones that people lost prior to the recession. We also know that people are working involuntarily in part-time jobs. So, but we know when we get our economy going back at full throttle, that growth is one of the key elements to reducing our deficit. Get people back to work in good paying jobs. That's key to getting things back on track. So we got to see the deficit, the annual deficit shrink. And then, obviously, some of the measures that I just talked about are going to be key to getting our budget back in balance. It does involve everyone getting a fair shot, but also everyone doing their fair share. And that's why I do believe that we need to let the 2001 and 2003 Bush tax cuts for the top 2% expire. Now, we were in federal budget surplus until the 2001 tax cuts were passed. And that began the spiral. I think about 2001, 2003 tax cuts, 2 unfunded wars, and the Medicare Part D program, which was unfunded. All told, in that first year, or first 4 years of the Bush administration, we went from surplus to adding 4.5 trillion to our unfunded obligations. That's a 10-year figure.
When it comes to healthcare, the expenses seem out of control. And that in 2010, the U.S. citizenry spent $2.6 trillion in healthcare costs. What, if any, role does the government have in reducing costs associated with healthcare?
I think we have to play a role, and the alternative is each man, woman, and child for themselves. Sink or swim, good luck. You negotiate the best price you possibly can. I mean, I was just talking about the folly of, under Tommy's watch, having this law written that says it's illegal for Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies for better prices for seniors. You need that government rule to use the collective voice of 40+ million seniors to get lower prices. It's just those type of reforms that have been included in America's New Health Law, the Affordable Care Act. And they are going to bend the cost curve. I know there's still skeptics out there, but it's just in its early stages. But we're, I believe, going to see significant bending. The cost projections of healthcare expenses increasing year after year after year prior to the passage of the law, and what they're projecting now is a significant difference. We also have to do more. But I think it's important that some of the transformative things that are a part of the Affordable Care Act be allowed to play out.
A lot of us don't quite get that. Could you explain how does the Affordable Care Act make healthcare more affordable? And the cost curve?
Well, let's start with Medicare, because I think we focus a lot on the other aspects, as appropriately we should, of the Affordable Care Act that provides the first opportunity for all Americans to have affordable, high-quality health care. And, you know, fully implemented, it will be fully implemented in January 2014 unless we elect a president or a Senate that, you know, is going to proceed on repealing it, so, but that, if it's fully implemented. But there's some very important Medicare reforms that a lot of the ideas actually came from Wisconsin, and I was proud to sort of talk about the reforms that we're doing here, because we know we're a state compared to the rest of the country where we practice high-quality medicine in much more efficient ways than we see in other parts of the country, and the country has a lot to learn from us. I'll give you one example of, or a couple of examples. There's something called accountable care organizations. We have several health entities in the state who are organizing as such. And the idea is that rather than paying procedure by procedure, we're going to pay for a high-quality outcome for a patient. And by having the specialists involved, for example, in a complicated case, talk together instead of each operating in their own silo, and coordinate the care for that patient, is actually producing higher quality results that cost less. And we have several, as I said, several institutions in the state that are doing this, and they get to actually pocket a bit of the savings. That's the incentive to start transforming medicine in that way. Now, if you have these demonstration projects, et cetera, in Medicare, which covers 48 million, I'm trying to think, there's you know, the disabled population as well as the senior population that Medicare serves. These sort of reforms drive other reforms. Let me give you a historical example on that if you have any question about it. There was a time when Medicare decided that we didn't need to have 12 days of hospitalization following most simple surgeries. That's what they used to reimburse for. And overnight they said, we're going to go down to 5 unless there's extraordinary circumstances. 5 hospital days. What happened? Well, on quality of care, people were less likely to get hospital infections, etc. They had better outcomes. And think about the savings when you lopped 7 days of stay overnight off the bills. The private insurance industry followed suit immediately. It saved billions and billions of dollars. So leadership in Medicare can drive innovation and transformations that improve quality and lower price. It's a logical next step. So I think we're heading in the right direction. We're not done. But the Affordable Care Act has a lot of ways that we can begin to manage the rapidly spiraling increase in health costs.
Campaigns spend a lot of time talking about the value and importance of building a strong middle class. You mentioned it last week, Tommy Thompson mentioned it. The media doesn't generally ask about this a lot, and the campaigns don't generally talk a lot about poverty and the impoverished. They don't have much of a voice in a lot of campaigns. But can you take some time, talk about your vision of the federal role in addressing the needs of families who either live in poverty or people with disabilities or other, what you call vulnerable groups? What's the federal government's role for them?
I would start by saying that equality of opportunity not just as an aspiration, but making it real is the role. And it's not just a federal role, I think it's one of the essential roles of government, and, right there next to providing for the common defense. It's an aspiration that everyone has a fair shot and equal opportunity, but in reality we know that doesn't always happen. Educational investments is one of the key ways of making us go from aspiring to equality of opportunity to actually reading it and showing it. And we know we have a lot of room to go there. Whether it's Head Start, which I am committed to funding, and there's obviously a big battle as that's splashed in the Ryan budget that Michael supports. But all the way through higher education, where we've just heard the startling statistic that student debt has surpassed credit card debt in the United States. It's surpassed the $1 trillion level. Education, higher education, has to be accessible to everyone on the basis of their skills and their interests. And it's part of the way we level the playing field for all Americans. I also just want to say something about an issue that I'm hearing bubbling up a little bit more in this campaign, about welfare as a part of the conversation on poverty. Because I have an opponent who claims credit for practically, well, I don't think he says he eliminated, well, yeah, I think he did say, I trust the guy who ended welfare to be the guy to find programs to end Medicare and Medicaid, but whatever he meant, he claims a lot of credit for. There's lots of ways to measure the effectiveness of that. For me, it's child poverty. And in Wisconsin, 18% of our children live in poverty. And of that, half live in extreme poverty. I don't think we have it right yet. And I think we need to work to get it right. I think about, in that regard, the fight over the Farm Bill right now. I'm going to say, what does the Farm Bill have? The nutrition programs. The Farm Bill is stalled. It's expired. We're supposed to pass it, and we almost always pass it on this hugely bipartisan basis every 5 years or 6 years. The Senate passed a bipartisan Farm Bill. The House Ag Committee passed a bipartisan Ag Bill. The Speaker will not bring it to the floor because of the Tea Party elements of his caucus who want to gut child nutrition programs, family nutrition programs. This has got to be a huge ingredient in our fight to eliminate poverty in our nation, and the gamesmanship has got to stop.
Issue of bipartisanship is on the minds of many voters.
I just realized I didn't address the disability.
Did you want to?
Let me try to do it really quickly. This is actually one that I feel very passionately about, both on a very personal level as well as politically. And when I was growing up, my mother spent several years as a personal care attendant to a man with CP. And I, occasionally would drop by her work, and it helped me understand all the different obstacles and barriers, be they physical barriers or technological barriers that exist. This guy was brilliant, and we have to look in our policy for ways to remove those barriers, allow individuals with disabilities to participate as fully in the fabric of American life as possible. I fought a battle when Tommy was governor that I think some in the audience who served in the state legislature may remember, when there was a proposal to institutionalize folks who could have a lot more capacity to be a part of their communities and their workforce if they received attendant care at home. And we were fortunately able to defeat that initiative at the state level. The federal level, we have to keep on looking at the perverse incentives that make it so hard for people with disabilities to attain appropriate employment. And one of those is that we define our disability support programs, we define disability as unable to work. And so if you start to work, people might lose health insurance benefits or access to the home care needs, or the home care that they need. We shouldn't have those barriers there, and so working on building upon a program called Ticket to Work is something that I strongly support.
I appreciate you taking the time to explain that. The bipartisan question I want to ask you has to do with the fact that we don't see a lot of, or don't feel that there's a lot of bipartisan efforts in Washington, and yet there's a candidate I've heard on the campaign trail anywhere who says, you know, I can work across the aisle. So we'll assume you can work across the aisle if you want to, but given the climate in Washington today, what issues are there on which you would refuse to compromise? You feel so strongly on it, they've got to do it the way you do it.
Well, right now, probably the biggest that is facing us is the need for everyone, if we're all in this together, to do their fair share. And so, you know, one of the pieces of legislation that I introduced was a bill called the Buffett Rule that says if you make over $1 million a year, you should have to pay at least at the same rate as hardworking middle-class families do in Wisconsin. We read stories about the most profitable companies of our day paying zero. And yet you'll hear all these debates about the marginal rate. Well, in reality, everyone in America has to do their fair share. It's this idea, you know, of the American dream. If you climb the ladder of success, you should not be able to pull that ladder up behind you. You have an obligation to keep it there so others too can participate. So that's certainly an example.
Another foreign policy question, the hour's running from us. When you talk about looking towards Israel, what kind of support do you believe the U.S. government should give to Palestinians in Israel?
Well, there have been principles that have guided the support that the U.S. has given that I think are worthy. Certainly, humanitarian aid is a part of that. But I think in not just when we look at the Palestinian peoples, but throughout the Middle East, that our foreign policy has to, and our foreign aid policy, has to seek out those who are moderate, those who support democracy, and those who seek peace. And strengthen those voices as a way to moving forward. And so, you know, those are the type of principles that I would base not only aid to the Palestinian people, but in other countries too, as we will certainly be reevaluating foreign aid.
Jumping back home. With the Second Amendment such a strong part of our nation's culture, how do we attempt to prevent tragedies like what happened in Aurora, Colorado, and Oakland?
First of all, you're very right about the strong tradition of the Second Amendment, especially in a state like Wisconsin, where the sporting tradition, the hunting tradition. As I travel the state, everyone says they already have November 17th, the first day of deer hunting, already circled on the calendar, and that's a tradition. I'm a gun owner. I support the Second Amendment and believe that law-abiding people should be able to possess firearms in concert, consistent with the Second Amendment. That said, I believe that we can reconcile the Second Amendment with laws like background checks. No, simple. Except we have to recognize that 40% of the exchanges or sales in the United States aren't subject to a background check. They used to call it the gun show loophole, but now with Craigslist and other informal. I met recently with the legislative committee of the Wisconsin Chiefs of Police. And as I cast votes, they don't happen very often at the federal level, but the occasional vote on an issue related to guns, I look to law enforcement for counsel. And their number one priority right now is closing those enormous loopholes that allow so many guns to exchange hands without a background check. I think the two other things I would say with respect to the recent heinous tragedies, and touching so close to home here with the attack on the Sikh temple. We have to do a much better job at confronting mental illness in our society, and it has been something that has been a lifelong battle of mine in the fight for healthcare reforms, to bring us to a place where we don't treat, where there is available treatment for people with mental illness, and that we don't simply ignore the warning signs, but instead have services and treatment to offer folks. And I fought for mental health parity in our medical system. The other thing I think we need to be aware of is domestic hate groups. And that's one of the things we learned about the fellow, the murderer who struck here, long affiliated with a domestic hate group. I follow closely the work of the Southern Poverty Law Center and Morris Dees and Mark Potok. In fact, I met with him not too long ago about hearing their suggestions of how, first of all, we need to be more aware of the hate within our midst and strategies for confronting it as a society. But it is here, domestically as well as internationally.
Question from a member of the audience today. Is there a fundamental difference in values between you and your opponent regarding responsibilities of communities to care for individuals? Can you explain and elaborate?
I'm not going to, I'll let Tommy Thompson speak to his own values, but I will say the evidence out there is what proposals we are putting forward to confront the enormous challenges of our time. And I've referenced several times that my opponent, Tommy Thompson, has spent the last 6 to 8 months embracing the Paul Ryan plan, the budget, and saying he wants to be the 51st vote in the US Senate to pass that. And I look at budgets as values documents. And so I'm not going to speak to how he would portray his own set of values, but when I look at what organizations that are founded around a set of values have said about the Paul Ryan budget, they are not my values. I do believe we're in this together, and that everyone deserves a fair shot, but everyone needs to do their fair share. And that's the antithesis of what we see in the Paul Ryan budget.
My last question for you today is about the question we didn't get to, but it's something you've prepared for, you'd like to speak to, we haven't asked. I wonder, what's left dangling for you that you want to address today? What issue and why?
You know, one of the things that we really didn't get into in any depth is how in Wisconsin we go about reviving and breathing new life into the American dream for our fellow citizens. We talked a little bit about it in terms of focusing on the key investments from the federal level that help build the economy in the near term and the long term. Things like education, our capacity for innovation and research leads to economic development and infrastructure. But one thing I didn't talk about that I feel very strongly about is how we revive our manufacturing agenda in this state, our manufacturing economy. And we're a state that historically has made things. Ships, paper, engines. This is a city in its industrial heyday, built things, made things. And we have seen plants close, mills close, jobs shipped overseas. And I don't believe you can have a strong, diverse economy without that sector being healthy and rebuilt. And it's been a large part of my body of work and one of my goals in the U.S. Senate to bring other industrial state senators together across party lines to have a manufacturing agenda. But just as one quick example, earlier this year I introduced bipartisan legislation with Reed Ribble, freshman Republican from the Fox Valley, the Paper Valley, specifically to help us level the playing field for the paper industry in Wisconsin. China has been subsidizing its paper industry to the tune of $33 billion in recent years. How can you compete without a level playing field? You know, our workers are second to none, but without a level playing field, they can't. Well, our bill was included in a larger trade package, signed into law, and now we have the tools to fight back. But we have to have that vigilance in order to seriously rebuild our Wisconsin economy. Wisconsin can be in the lead.
Congresswoman Baldwin, thank you very much for coming here, for talking to us, and thank you all for your time. Remember that the conversation doesn't end because the town hall ends. You need to take what you heard here, and if you were here last week, what you heard, discuss it with your community members, your neighbors, and your spouse, your family members, and go online. If you have more questions that weren't asked and answered today, the candidates' campaigns, both Thompson and Baldwin, you go online and email those questions in, do the homework that you need to do, and a round of applause for you because you came out today.
Congresswoman Baldwin, and again, Ben, for moderating last week's and this week's program. On behalf of the JCRC and the Candidate Forum Committee, thank you all for coming out, and I'd like to give a special thanks to Mike Mason, who's also on the Planning Committee. I'm sorry I didn't have a complete list at the beginning. And We hope you will stay tuned. The election is 3 weeks from Tuesday, rather. And if you are not yet registered and are a resident of the city of Milwaukee, you see Jane Avner here. She has registration forms. If you're a resident of some other community, you can go to your city or village clerk and get registration forms there. You will need proper identification. On election day, if you are properly registered, you will not need photo ID or any other identification, just a name and address, and give that to them. So I hope to see you all at the polls on election day. And again, thank you for coming over.